Picture this: World War II. The oceans ruled the battlefield. Britain faced a deadly problem. German U-boats hunted Allied convoys relentlessly. Supplies across the Atlantic were sinking fast. Traditional ships were too vulnerable. Steel was in short supply. Britain needed a miracle. Out of desperation came the weirdest idea ever. What if warships were built from ice? Yes, ice. Frozen water. It sounded absurd, but the plan was deadly serious. The project was called Habakkuk. The name came from the Bible. Behold ye among the heathen, in regard and wondered marvelously. Fitting words for such a bizarre vision, the mastermind behind it. Geoffrey Pike. Pike was no ordinary engineer. He was an eccentric genius. He dreamed up ideas both brilliant and insane. Habakkuk was his most daring. Pike pitched it to Winston Churchill. Churchill loved wild ideas, and he said, yes, it's the plan. Build a colossal aircraft carrier, not from steel, not from wood, from ice mixed with wood pulp. The material had a name: pykrete. It was named after Pike himself. Pykrete was no ordinary ice. It was stronger than concrete, and it floated beautifully. You could shoot it with a bullet. The bullet wouldn't go through. Ice is armor. It's ice's salvation. To the Allies, it sounded crazy enough to work. Britain set the wheels in motion. It's the idea: create floating fortresses, massive carriers in the middle of the ocean, so they would carry squadrons of planes. They could refuel, rearm, and strike. Boats would stand no chance. And best of all, it would save steel. Steel factories were already overworked. Use, on the other hand, was plentiful. Habakkuk became a top-secret plan. Canada was chosen for testing. Why Canada? Plenty of lakes, plenty of ice, and fewer prying eyes. In 1942, experiments began. Scientists worked in freezing labs. They froze water mixed with sawdust. The results were astounding. Pykrete was tough as nails. Even Winston Churchill was impressed. At a meeting, a block of pykrete was shown. An officer pulled out a gun. He fired at the ice. The bullet ricocheted. It had nearly hit another general. The room was stunned. Churchill puffed his cigar. This, he said, will win the war. The prototype was ordered. Engineers got to work. They built it on Patricia Lake, Alberta. Workers hauled ice day and night. Logs and sawdust were mixed in. Slowly, a strange structure emerged. A floating block of frozen fortress. It was 60 feet long. It looked nothing like a ship, more like a frozen barge, but it floated. And that was all that mattered. Soldiers tested it with axes. Their blades barely scratched the surface. The thing was indestructible. Optimism soared. Plans expanded. The final version would be enormous. 600 meters long, nearly 2 million tons of ice, a floating island. Planes could take off and land with ease. Guns could be mounted on the sides. It would dominate the seas. Churchill dreamed of sending it to the Atlantic. Convoys would sail safely beneath its shadow. The Nazis would tremble, all from frozen water and wood pulp. The world's first unsinkable ship, or so they thought. The prototype on Patricia Lake proved the idea wasn't impossible. But building a giant ice carrier? That was another story. First challenge? Refrigeration. Ice melts. Everyone knew that. To keep a 600-meter ship frozen, they needed cooling systems. Lots of them. Engineers planned to embed pipes through the hull. Coolant would circulate non-stop. The ship itself would need its own refrigeration plant. Imagine a ship powered by freezing itself. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but the cost would be enormous. Which brought problem number 2, money. Building Habakkuk would require millions of pounds and vast manpower. Every ton of ice had to be harvested, shaped, and fused. Even with Canadian winters, production was slow. Each block took time to freeze. And sawdust had to be mixed at the right ratio. Too much sawdust, it crumbled. Too little, it cracked. Precision was key. But wartime factories had no patience for ice recipes. Then came size. The proposed ship was ridiculous in scale. 2 million tons of frozen mass. Longer than 3 football fields. Wider than a city block. Taller than a skyscraper laid on its side. Even if they built it, Moving it would be a nightmare. A harbor had to be dug just to launch it. Dry decks couldn't hold something that big. It would need to be constructed directly on the water, piece by piece, which meant workers freezing in Arctic winds day and night. Britain wondered if this was madness, yet Churchill remained excited, loved the thought of icebergs armed with guns. He pushed scientists to keep going. Scientists began to worry. Ice, even pykrete, wasn't invincible. Heat from the sun could weaken it. Waves could erode it, and salt water made things worse. Freshwater ice melts slower than seawater ice, so the carrier would rot in the ocean, unless it was constantly cooled, which brought them back to refrigeration. The cycle of problems never ended. Engineers ran tests with flamethrowers. They blasted pykrete with fire. It took longer to melt than normal ice, but it still melted, and ships fought in hot climates, not just the Arctic. Imagine Habakkuk sailing to the Mediterranean. It would sweat itself into a puddle. Some suggested building smaller versions, maybe just floating platforms. Others dreamed of icy walls protecting harbors, but Pike wanted the big ship. He wouldn't let go. Meanwhile, scientists had doubts about stability. As cracks under stress, waves pound relentlessly. A 2-million-ton ship would bend and twist. If cracks spread, the ship could split. Imagine half a frozen carrier drifting away mid-battle. Not exactly unsinkable. The Royal Navy grew uneasy. They needed real ships, not frozen fantasies. And steel production was improving by 1943. American shipyards were spitting out vessels faster than ever. Liberty ships crossed the Atlantic in convoys. The U-boat threat began to fade. Suddenly, Habakkuk felt less urgent. The war was moving faster than the ice. Still, tests continued. The Patricia Lake prototype lasted through summer. But by autumn, cracks appeared. The sun weakened its structure. Even with refrigeration, it sagged. Engineers patched holes with new ice. But patchwork fixes didn't inspire confidence. Critics laughed that Habakkuk was melting away. Pike argued the final version would be stronger. But funding started to dry up. Britain had other priorities. Normandy landings were being planned. Resources were shifted to tanks, planes, and steel ships. Habakkuk was quietly pushed aside. The dream of an ice aircraft carrier faded. Geoffrey Pike himself fell into depression. His eccentric brilliance was overshadowed by failure. The prototype at Patricia Lake was left to rot. Slowly, year by year, it sank beneath the surface. Today, divers can still find remnants. Rusted pipes, wooden planks, and frozen history thawed at last. By 1944, the fate of Project Habakkuk was all but sealed. The war had shifted. The Allies no longer feared total control of the Atlantic by U-boats. Convoy systems were stronger. Escort carriers made of steel patrolled the seas. And new technologies like sonar and radar tipped the balance. Habakkuk looked less like salvation and more like distraction. Churchill, once enthusiastic, turned his attention elsewhere. D-Day was in the works. Every resource had to support the invasion of Normandy. Ice carriers didn't fit the plan. The Royal Navy quietly closed the books on Habakkuk. Funding disappeared overnight. The scientists were dismissed. And Geoffrey Pike was left with a dream melting away. He had poured his soul into it. Pike believed unconventional thinking could win wars. But now, his greatest idea was laughed off as madness. The eccentric genius was heartbroken. He tried to push other projects. Concepts for snow vehicles, radical fuel-saving devices. But none gained traction. His reputation had taken too many hits. Colleagues grew tired of his erratic behavior. Pike suffered from depression. He felt like an outcast, misunderstood by the very system he wanted to serve. By 1948, the war was long over. Habakkuk was forgotten. Pike, overwhelmed by despair, took his own life. His brilliant but troubled mind left behind only unfinished ideas. Yet his strange vision refused to disappear entirely. For decades, rumors about a giant ice carrier spread. Was it real, or just another wartime myth? Divers at Patricia Lake had the answer. In the 1970s, they found remnants of the prototype. Rusted pipes buried in the mud, fragments of wood pulp and frozen sediment. Proof that Habakkuk wasn't fiction. It had been real. It had floated. And then, slowly, it had melted away. The story resurfaced in military history circles. Scholars marveled at the ambition. A ship the size of Manhattan, made of ice. It sounded like science fiction, yet it had nearly been built. Engineers studied the reports. They agreed. Technically possible, but wildly impractical. Pykrete worked, but the logistics didn't. Imagine maintaining a city-sized freezer in the ocean. The energy demands alone would cripple it. And then there was the problem of speed. Habakkuk was designed to crawl at 7 knots, slower than most destroyers. In fast-moving naval battles, that would be disastrous. So historians placed it in the category of beautiful failures, like Da Vinci's flying machines, or Napoleon's plans to invade England with hot air balloons. Habakkuk became a symbol of wartime desperation. When fear is high, no idea is too crazy. And Pike's dream captured that spirit. Churchill himself once said, "We must try the untried." Habakkuk was exactly that. In another world, perhaps it might have worked. Imagine a frozen fleet defending the Atlantic. Imagine Nazi U-boats forced to retreat from an iceberg armed with aircraft. It would have changed history or delayed the inevitable, but in our world, Habakkuk faded into obscurity. Today it survives mostly in stories. Military documentaries retell it with amazement. Historians shake their heads in disbelief, and fans of strange history love to share it. After all, how often do you hear about a ship made of ice? Even the name Habakkuk feels mythical. People sometimes think it's a joke, till they see the archival photos. Men with saws cutting blocks of ice. Engineers testing slabs with bullets, pipes coiled in snow. Then the laughter turns to awe, because it shows how far humans will go when survival is at stake. The Cold War later revived some interest. Could frozen platforms support missile silos in the Arctic? Could pykrete domes become military bases? None were built, but the thought remained. And so, Habakkuk lives on, half science, half legend. A ghost ship made, not of steel, but ice. Geoffrey Pike is remembered too, not as a failure, but as a visionary. A man who dared to think differently, sometimes too differently. His ice carrier didn't save Britain, but it reminded the world that imagination matters. Even failed ideas shape the future. Habakkuk was proof that limits can be tested, and that history's strangest experiments often leave the biggest stories. Stories that, like frozen ships, refuse to melt completely away.
That's it for today's Forgotten Tale. If this story made you raise an eyebrow don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that dusty little bell so you never miss another echo from the past. Drop it in the comments. We're always listening for new echoes. Got a weird bit of history you think we should cover? Until next time, keep your curiosity loud and your history weird.